Christmas in Bedford Falls by John Theo Jr. All you can take with you is that which you've given away. The day after Thanksgiving was a cold, overcast, dreary day in Bedford Falls. George Bailey found himself at the town cemetery just a few rows down from his father's grave. In front of him was a fresh grave. The simple marble stone was already in place with an inscription. It read, Edward Gower, 1880 to 1948. For decades, Mr. Gower had been the town pharmacist and beloved member of the community of Bedford Falls. He employed George when he was 12 years old to work the soda fountain in his drugstore as well as deliver prescriptions. Next to Mr. Gower's grave was the grave of his son, Robert Gower, who died from influenza in 1919 while at college. George remembered showing up to work the day Mr. Gower received the telegram about his son's death. Mr. Gower had long struggled with alcohol since his wife left him, and young George found his boss severely drunk while at work. Mr. Gower was so out of sorts that he accidentally placed poison in a child's prescription instead of medicine. Young George refused to deliver the prescription and was punished by Mr. Gower with a physical beating. George pleaded with his boss that the medicine was, in fact, poison. When Mr. Gower realized George was right, he begged the boy to forgive him. George never told a soul about what happened that day, and Mr. Gower never forgot the act of kindness young George showed him. From that time forward, Mr. Gower never touched alcohol again. George looked over the massive crowd gathered at the cemetery. Mr. Gower was more than just my childhood boss. We stayed in touch long after I left his employment. He encouraged me in my career ambitions, mourned with me when my father suddenly died, and stood by me on the day I wed Mary. I know some of you have similar stories as mine regarding Mr. Gower. In the crowd were friends, family, and strangers. Ma Bailey was there with Mrs. Hatch, Uncle Billy, Ernie, Bert, Violet, the Martinis, and Nick. There were only a few faces George didn't recognize. To his right, Mary stood at his side. Whenever there was trials, Mary was always at his side. Behind Mary were Janie, Pete, Tommy, and Zuzu. All four of his children were well-dressed and well-behaved. George winked at the kids as if to tell them he was proud of their behavior. Tommy returned the gesture with a wave. When my dad passed away, George continued, Mr. Gower constantly checked in on my family. Ma never forgot how helpful he was, especially when me or Harry needed a man's perspective on things. At the mention of her name, Ma Bailey started to cry and rested her head on Mrs. Hatch's shoulder. I will miss you, old friend, George said, looking down on the mahogany casket, which had yet to be lowered into the ground. Be at peace. Mr. Martini stepped up and rested his hand on George's shoulder. All are welcome at Martini's, he said with his thick Italian accent, so we can get out of this cold and raise a toast to the life of our friend, Mr. Gower. After the crowd dispersed, George walked arm in arm with his mother over to Peter Bailey's grave. Mary and the kids followed, with Zuzu running up to fill her dad's empty hand with her own. When they reached the grave, Tommy wiped snow off the top of his grandfather's stone, while Pete removed some dead flowers from the front. Thanks, boys, George said. Oh, how I wish your father would have lived to have seen his grandchildren, Ma said, pulling George closer. He would be so proud of you, George. Me, George said. What about his other son, the war hero who got the Medal of Honor? Of course he'd be proud of Harry, Ma said, but no less proud of you. You single-handedly kept his business alive during the worst economic time in this country's history, all the while fighting off your own enemy with Potter. As far as I'm concerned, you deserve a Medal of Honor as well. George laughed. You want to know something, Ma? You're okay. Ma leaned up to kiss her tall son. She picked up Zuzu and motioned for the other three kids. Come along, children. Mary took up the spot next to George, previously held by Ma. Come on, let's get out of this cold. George took one last look at his father's grave before turning to scan the gray, leafless cemetery. In the distance, a tall, stoic man dressed in a dark suit with no overcoat pushed an elderly man in a wheelchair towards an older section of the cemetery. The man in the wheelchair was dressed in a dark suit and wore a fancy hat with a blanket draped over his lap. He had an unfriendly, angry look George would recognize anywhere. It was Mr. Potter. George nodded to Mary in the direction of the two men. What do you think old man Potter's doing? Visiting the people he drove to an early grave, she said. Before George could say anything about the dark joke, Mary added, I'm sorry. I just see what that man does to you, and I want to scream. He's a sick man, sick in his soul. If he even has one, Mary added. George chuckled. Pop often said the same thing. Sorry again, Mary said. I'm just overprotective of the man I love. George looked up at the gray sky. Well, if my guardian angel ever retires, it's nice to know I have you as a backup. As they walked to catch up with Ma and the children, a phrase George had once read echoed in his mind. No man is a failure who has friends. Looking back at Mr. Potter, George realized that, by that standard, the old man was an utter failure. As George got into his old dented 1919 Dodge Brothers car, something started to gnaw at him. The contempt, anger, frustration he long associated with Mr. Potter eased up. In its place, a new emotion took form, one George had never associated with the old man. Pity. At Martini's, George shook hands with many of his friends. More than one of them mentioned the upcoming election for mayor of Bedford Falls. The current mayor, Kyle Wainwright, was a distant cousin to George's childhood friend, Sam Wainwright. Sam had his faults, but always ran his businesses honestly. Kyle, on the other hand, was as dirty as a pig in mud, with rumors that he was also on the payroll of Mr. Potter. Ernie and Mr. Martini had cornered George this time. George, you were made for something big, Mr. Martini said. Something important, Ernie added. Like mayor, George said. Yes, they both said. You're stuck in that shabby office day in and day out, Ernie said, when everyone knows you were a born leader. The job of mayor is no place for any man who doesn't want to crawl to Potter. That's why we need a man with, Mr. Martini searched for the word, morals. Thank you both for thinking so highly of me, George said, but I'll tell you what I've told Eustace, Billy, Bert, and all the others. I'm perfectly happy at the Bailey Building and Loan. I thought you had all these dreams and aspirations when you were younger. I did, George said, but I was wrong. I have a wonderful life at the Building and Loan that offers me time with my family and enough money to pay the bills. What else could a man want? You are testato, Mr. Martini said. What was that? George said, turning his head so his good ear faced his friend. That's Italian for stubborn, Mr. Martini said, motioning for Ernie to help him. Come along, let's leave Testardo alone. Mary came over and picked up her husband's hand. It was nice to see how many people showed up today. It was a great tribute for Mr. Gower, George said. They're here as much for you as they are for him. I don't know about that, George said, embarrassed. I'm going to take the children home. Will you be along shortly? I'll catch a ride home with Ernie. Don't be late, she said, slowly letting go of his hand. Mrs. Bailey, you worry too much. After Mary and the children left Martini's, Violet appeared beside George. She was the only woman who had on a pale dress at the funeral and wore an expensive floral perfume that only Gower Drugs sold. George wondered where she would purchase the perfume now that the drugstore was closed. Maybe the Emporium? Hi, George. That was a nice funeral today. Hi, Violet. Did you know some of the best memories of my childhood were in Mr. Gower's drugstore? Really? Mr. Gower was like a dad to a lot of the children in town who didn't have one. George knew Violet was raised by her mom after her dad died of cancer and had no siblings. That's a nice memory, Violet. Gower's was always filled with laughing children gathered around that soda fountain. Violet turned away as if she were ashamed. I never liked school, and I didn't have many friends, and liked going there to see Mr. Gower and... She paused before adding, and you. There was an awkward silence. Well, Ma always said that pretty girls sometimes had a harder time finding female friends. Thank you, George, Violet said. You always knew what to say to make me feel special. Violet moved a bit closer, and George instinctively shuffled a bit farther away to offset the uncomfortable, closed space. Violet seemed to pick up on George's uneasiness and dropped her head. You have a nice family, George. I'm happy for your success. I don't know about monetary success, George laughed. Every month I'm shocked when the Bailey Building and Loan makes its bills. Well, as far as I'm concerned, Violet said, you're the richest man in the world. You have a wife who adores you and 4 wonderful children, and are probably the most respected man in all of Bedford Falls. George didn't know what to say with all the humbling list of compliments from Violet. She took out a handkerchief and wiped her eyes. There was both beauty and sadness about Violet that George never understood. Violet started to cry. Maybe the funeral brought back memories of her childhood. He didn't know. George looked around the room and made eye contact with Bert, who seemed to pick up on George's awkward situation and approached the two. Violet, Bert said, why don't you let me and the wife take you home? Violet looked up at George, her beautiful eyes glistening with more tears about to fall. She was a stunning woman, but couldn't seem to get her act together. She had dated many of the top bachelors in Bedford Falls, but never married. To George, it was as if she were waiting for someone else to come around the corner. but that person never came or didn't exist. Ernie came over to join them. "George, I'm heading out to start my shift. Still need a ride?" "Yeah, I'll be right there." He turned to Bert and Violet. "I got this, George," Bert said. "Bye, Violet," George said. "It's always good to see you." "You too, George." On his way out, Mr. Martini and Nick both tried to talk to George about running for mayor again, but George pointed to his bad ear, claiming he couldn't hear them as he rushed out the door. "Cab is over here," Ernie said. "Think we may get our first snowfall tonight?" Maybe so, George said. On the drive home, Ernie passed through town. Outside the bank, Mr. Potter was being helped into the back seat of his shiny black Chrysler Windsor by his assistant, or bodyguard, depending on who you asked. "Ernie, you remember when we were kids seeing old man Potter in that horse and carriage driving through town?" Ernie laughed. "That miser may be the richest man in town, but he was the last to give up a horse and buggy." "He's a strange man," George said as they passed by. "Say, Ernie, do you know if he has any friends?" Ernie turned to give George a confused look. "Who'd want to be that man's friend? You couldn't pay me enough." Ernie slowed down in front of George's house. "Here we are, George, 320 Sycamore." George was home just in time for dinner. Afterwards, the kids took baths upstairs while George and Mary sat in front of the large fireplace in the living room with cups of coffee. Once, a long time ago, they roasted a chicken in that same fireplace on their honeymoon, while Bert and Ernie serenaded them from outside. It was raining that night, and the house was on the verge of falling down. Over the next few years, Mary had brought the house back to its former glory and made it into a wonderful home. Mary put her china cup down and reached for her husband's hand. "What are you thinking about? Running for mayor?" "Just thinking of Mr. Potter at the cemetery. I can't get the image of that man out of my mind." "What image?" "Well, for the first time in my life, I feel bad for the old man. He's nearing the twilight of his life, and he's alone and hated." "Only you would think of someone like Mr. Potter with sympathy," Mary said. "Did I ever tell you that I love you?" "What was that?" George said, pretending he couldn't hear when he actually did. "I said I love you," Mary shouted. "And that's your good ear you're pointing to." "Love you too, Mrs. Bailey." All weekend, the image of Mr. Potter was stuck in George's mind. Every Sunday, George drove the family through Main Street on the way to church and could see all the storefronts closed. However, in the back of the bank, there was always a light on. Potter was the only man George knew who worked 7 days a week. That Sunday morning in church, the pastor talked about loving your enemies and blessing those who curse you. It was as if the message was meant specifically for George. On Monday, George showed up at the bank. After making a deposit, he knocked on the office door stenciled with the words Henry F. Potter, President. In his right hand was a small box of cookies that Mary had made. No one answered the door, so George let himself in. Mr. Potter was on the phone, dressed in his same dark suit and tie he always wore. Behind him, his tall assistant stood in a matching suit. Potter hung up the phone without saying goodbye. He gave George a twisted grin. "What are you doing here, George?" "Well, with Uncle Billy's failing memory, I handle all the building and loan deposits now." "Well, the bank tellers are up front," Potter barked. "I just thought I'd bring over some homemade cookies for the holidays." George placed the small box down on the ornate, dark wood desk. Potter's tall assistant, whom George had never heard speak, reached over to open the box. Potter's hand shot up and smacked his assistant's hand away. "What do you want, George?" "Just to say hello." "Well, hello and goodbye." George reclined in the seat opposite Mr. Potter as if he were asked to stay. Once, a few years ago, Mr. Potter had offered George a fancy cigar and a fancy job when he was in that same seat. It was the temptation of a lifetime, but George had made the right decision to decline the offer. The two men now locked gazes, with Potter breaking the silence. "What are you so happy about?" "Oh, the joy of the Lord, I guess." "Hogwash!" "I saw you at the cemetery the other day." "And? What's your point?" Mr. Potter said. "Contrary to popular belief, I wasn't a spawn from hell. I had a family once, too." George laughed. This was the closest Mr. Potter had ever come to cracking a joke. "I realized something after I saw you." "Gee, George, I can't wait to hear of your intellectual epiphany." "You have no friends." "Most people hate me, and I don't like them either," Mr. Potter said, his voice escalating. "Now, what do you want?" "Well, I come here not asking for a thing, only to offer you cookies and to let you know I've made a decision." "And that is?" "To be your friend." Mr. Potter leaned from his wheelchair over the desk and sniffed. "Kind of early in the day to be drinking, isn't it, George?" George smiled. "I'm sober and I'm serious." "Well, if that's all you came to say, then you can leave now. I have work to do." George got up. Have a good day, Mr. Potter. The rest of the week was slow at the Bailey Brothers Building and Loan as people were getting ready for the holidays. In the office, George noticed, as if for the first time, how often Tilly, Eustace, or Uncle Billy would talk bad about Mr. Potter with customers or with each other. You know, George said, we shouldn't be making jokes about old man Potter, especially to customers. Uncle Billy dusted his taxidermied crow on the shelf. George, that man single-handedly put your father, my only brother, in an early grave. George wanted to say something in Potter's defense, but Uncle Billy was right. Potter had been the cause of a lot of misery for a lot of people. I know, Uncle Billy, but it still doesn't make it right. He was once someone's son, George said. There's a rumor that he was even engaged once. Eustace laughed. Maybe to a troll. Uncle Billy laughed, and George was surprised how much he wanted to laugh as well. The fact was that Henry Potter had a story like everyone else, but no one cared to find out what it was. On Friday night, George left work early to drive over to Mr. Potter's home on the edge of town. He entered a long driveway which led to a dark mansion up on a hilltop. To one side, the home overlooked the Bedford Falls Cemetery, and on the other side, the Seneca River, which flowed quickly from a recent heavy rains. As a child, the neighborhood kids would say that the Potter mansion was haunted. George could see how the rumors came about. The massive home was in need of repairs. The gray paint was chipping, and some of the copper gutters were missing. Medieval gargoyles were perched on the corners of the slate roof. In the red glow of the setting sun, they looked especially scary. George walked up the steps and knocked on a massive oak door several times, but no one answered. He tried the door and found it unlocked. "Hello?" he said, stepping into the dimly lit foyer. Voices came from a distant room. George walked past a grand staircase. On the second-floor balcony, he could see furniture draped with sheets. He remembered that Mr. Potter was confined to a wheelchair and never went up there. George walked through a dark and formal living room with only one light on. Firelight gleamed from the open door of the next room, which appeared to be a library and office. The space was the size of the entire building and loan office. In the darkened room, Mr. Potter watched a movie reel of the world news. His assistant sat in the corner by the fireplace, eating quietly. Next to Mr. Potter was also a plate of food that looked like it was barely touched. A makeshift movie screen had been erected, and the black and white news on the screen spoke of the rebuilding efforts in Europe since the war ended. George opened the door a bit wider, causing a loud creak. Mr. Potter turned around and his assistant stood up. Potter's eyes widened. "Who let you in?" "I let myself in," George said. "I was just in the neighborhood and stopped by to say hello." "Well, hello and goodbye," Mr. Potter said, shutting off the projector. "Oh, don't worry," George said, walking over to sit down on the leather couch next to Mr. Potter's wheelchair. "I can only stay for a few minutes. Tommy and Zuzu have a play tonight that I can't miss." "Oh, how joyful for me," Potter groused. "You'd like the play," George said. "It's about an old miser who doesn't like Christmas." "Ebenezer Scrooge was a victim as far as I'm concerned," Potter said. George tapped the movie projector. "You know, Mr. Potter, us regular people have to go to the movies to watch these newsreels." "Well, I'm not regular." "Oh, you could say that again," George said with a chuckle. Potter's assistant coughed and sounded like he was trying not to laugh. Potter gave him a stern glare and he stopped. "Anything good to report on the news?" George said. "Europe's still recovering from the war, Stalin's making a mess of the world, and President Truman's no better than Roosevelt." Mr. Potter reached up to restart the movie projector. "Now be quiet if you're going to stay." George quietly watched the remaining few minutes of the news. Mr. Potter took notes on a yellow legal pad of paper. When George asked him what he was doing, the old man shushed him. After the newsreel ended, Mr. Potter's assistant turned on the lights and started to break down the movie projector. Potter tossed the notepad down on the table. George turned the legal pad so he could read it. "Gosh, you take notes to be given to Senator Ives?" "You think my work is tied to this little town?" Mr. Potter said. "I have investments all over the world, and my influence is felt throughout all of New York." "I'm glad we're friends and not enemies then," George joked. "Why do you keep smiling?" Mr. Potter said. "What was that?" "It's my bad ear." "I said, why do you keep smiling?" Mr. Potter nearly shouted. "It's like you're waiting to give me some bad news." "Oh, no bad news here, Mr. Potter. Just stopping by to say hello to my newest friend." "I don't want friends," he said, motioning to his assistant. "And if I did want friends, I wouldn't choose a Bailey." George laughed. "Sorry, but the pickings are slim for you. I'm the only game in town right now in the friend market." The assistant wheeled Mr. Potter over to his desk. George got up from the couch and took up a seat in one of the two leather chairs across from the desk. George noticed a portrait of Mr. Potter sitting over the fireplace, similar to the one he had in his office. Both paintings showed the old man without a smile. The decor in the room was dark wood with strange statues and morbid paintings. "You mentioned the other day that you had a family once," George said, turning back to face Mr. Potter. "What happened to them?" "They died," Mr. Potter said, scratching something on a spreadsheet. "I heard a rumor that you were once engaged. Is that true?" Mr. Potter looked out the window as if he were watching a movie. "Mr. Potter?" "Yes," he mumbled. "Was it true?" "Yes," he mumbled again. "What happened?" "She died," he said, going back to his desk work. "Just like everyone dies." "What was her name?" "Doesn't matter now." "What do you think happens when you die, Mr. Potter?" "You go in the ground," he said. "You're wrong." "Hogwash." "I once read," George said, "for unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required." Mr. Potter looked up. "Where'd you read that ridiculous statement?" "The Bible." "The Bible," he grumbled. "Rebecca once believed in that nonsense, and it didn't save her." "Was that her name?" George said. "Rebecca?" Mr. Potter didn't respond and went back to his spreadsheet. George stood up and put his hat back on. "I feel bad for you, Mr. Potter. You have more than what you could spend in 10 lifetimes, yet you're unhappy." Mr. Potter continued to look over his spreadsheet. "It's not about the money, George." "What is it about, then?" "Being in control, not answering to people less intelligent than you. There are too many imbeciles in positions of power these days." "Money, my man, means freedom. Free from poverty, free from hunger, free from the cold, free from so many hindrances of this world. Freedom to be your own captain." "You can either serve God or Mammon," George mumbled, walking towards the door. "What did you just say?" "I said you look like a slave to me." "A what?" Potter nearly shouted. "I answer to no man." "I didn't say you were a slave to a man, but to things. Every day you pore over your books and investments. You work 7 days a week. You have more than you could ever spend. How much is enough?" Mr. Potter gave a half grin. "Just a little bit more, George. Just a little more." "Well, from my point of view, you look like a servant rather than a master." "I just buried my good friend Mr. Gower, and the church could barely hold all the people who showed up for his funeral. That man led a rich life. He left a legacy. What will you leave, Mr. Potter?" "Oh, that reminds me," Mr. Potter said. "I'm raising the rent on the new tenant moving into the Gower drugstore. Thank you for reminding me, George." George shook his head. Mr. Potter seemed deaf to reason. "Good night, Ebenezer. I'll see you soon." George came home in time to get a quick dinner. Mary had a plate ready for him. "Sorry I wasn't here to have dinner with you. I stopped by Old Man Potter's for a chat." "You're sure you want to be friends with that man?" "Not really, but I somehow feel called to. Something about seeing him at the cemetery struck me. He's a lonely man. A lonely and mean man. I won't argue that." "Whatever you think is best," Mary said. "Harry called to say that he and Ruth will be here for Christmas with the baby. Oh, Mom will be over the moon." After the play, George carried Zuzu up the stairs, motioning for Pete, Tom, and Janie to follow. George took the first step and had to steady himself due to Zuzu's size. Her baby girl was getting so big. He reached out and grasped the knob on the end of the banister rail. It popped off like it had done so many times before. George smiled and put the knob back in its spot. Mary had often wanted to fix it, but George liked it the way it was. It was a reminder of how far the house had come. The home, like most people, had parts that were still broken. After reading Zuzu and Janie a book, George went into the boys' room. Pete was reading a Roy Rogers comic, and Tommy was already tucked in his bed and half asleep. "Lights out, Petey." "Can I just finish this page?" "Go ahead," George said, turning to kiss Tommy's forehead. His youngest son opened his eyes and smiled. "I can't sleep." "I can see that," George said. "What's on your mind?" "I was just thinking that I want to be just like you when I grow up." "Really?" George said. "Don't you want to build things and travel the world?" Tommy shook his head back and forth. "I like it here." "In this little town?" "It's home, Daddy. It's where you and Mommy are." "You have a long time to think about it. Now get some sleep." Outside the bedroom, George smiled at the wisdom his youngest son had shown. What had taken George decades to realize about work, Tommy already knew. It wasn't about traveling, becoming famous, or becoming rich. It was about being with your loved ones. It didn't matter where that place was. The first few weeks of December were cold but sunny. Still, no snow had fallen on Bedford Falls. The downtown was a bustle with people buying Christmas presents at places like the Emporium and Anderson's. Martini's was busy, as was the movie house, which played a Clark Gable picture. George stopped by the bank at least once or twice a week and talked with Mr. Potter for a few minutes before he was usually asked to leave by the old man. Each time he noticed, Mr. Potter let him stay a few extra minutes before saying how busy he was. It seemed to George that he was chipping away at the icy exterior of Mr. Potter. Still, he wondered, was there a beating heart underneath? The Saturday before Christmas was the Bedford Falls annual Christmas parade. The town retailers and local radio station put on the festival, as well as the 2 local churches. George opened the building in loan-up so Mary and the kids could watch the parade from the warm office. The Martinis also came by, as did Uncle Billy, Eustace, Tilly, Ma, and Mrs. Hatch. George made sure everyone had a seat while Mary made hot cocoa for the children. After the parade started, George held up his pipe to Mary to let her know that he was stepping out for a minute to get some tobacco. The moment he was outside, he remembered that Gower's drugstore was closed. He would have to go get his pipe tobacco elsewhere. Across the street, the lights were on in the bank. George weaved in between parade floats and made his way over to the bank. Inside, the janitor mopped the empty building. George walked along the edge of the main space to avoid stepping on the wet floor. "Hi, Greg. I'm going to just say hi to Mr. Potter." "No problem, Mr. Bailey." George made his way over to Mr. Potter's office door and opened it with a knock. Mr. Potter was dressed in his dark suit, sitting at his desk, as George knew he would be. His tall assistant quietly watched the parade go by outside through the large paned window. "Mr. Potter, you should see the parade." George took up a spot next to the assistant at the window. "Will you look at that float, Mr. Potter? Probably cost them a lot of money for all those decorations." "A waste of money, if you ask me," Mr. Potter said, not moving from his desk. George walked over from the window behind Mr. Potter and pulled the wheelchair out from the desk. "Come look, just for a minute." "What are you doing, sir?" Mr. Potter shouted. George had never heard the man yell like that. "Put me back." "Just stop and take a look, will you?" George said, bringing the man up to the window. "The only thing we're missing is the dusting of snow." "Put me back and leave this instant," Mr. Potter said. He sounded as if he were beyond upset, almost as if he were about to cry. "Okay, Mr. Potter," George said, wheeling him back to the desk. "I apologize. Christmas comes once a year, and I wanted you to see how the town came out to celebrate." Mr. Potter adjusted his chair closer to the desk. "I don't care about the town, these people, or you for that matter. Now, good day to you." George looked over at the assistant, who shrugged his shoulders. "Sorry, Mr. Potter. Good day, sir." On Christmas Eve, the Baileys went to church. Pete, Janie, Tommy, and Zuzu participated in a nativity play. Old Christmas hymns were sung, and a reading from the Gospel of Luke was read. After church, George drove everyone home, and they finished decorating the Christmas tree with tinsel and ornaments the children made. The phone rang after the children were in bed. "Hello, Bailey residence," George said. George arrived at the Bedford Falls Hospital a half an hour later. It was a modest hospital, clean and able to handle most issues. Mr. Potter was in a private room with his assistant sitting outside. George handed the assistant a thermos of soup Mary had made. "Here you go. Merry Christmas." The tall man stood up with a shocked look, as if no one had ever done something nice for him before. Thank you," he said. George realized for the first time why the man had never spoke. He was ashamed of his stammer. "You're welcome," George said. "What's your name, by the way?" "But Boris," the man said. "Nice to finally meet you, Boris. Is Mr. Potter awake?" Boris nodded and opened the door for George. Inside the spacious room, George found Mr. Potter dressed in linen pajamas, sitting up in a hospital bed. It was the first time he had ever seen the man dressed in anything but a dark suit. Mr. Potter read from a newspaper with a stack of other newspapers beside him. "Boris seems like a nice enough fella," George said. Mr. Potter didn't look up from his reading. "I told that simpleton not to let anyone in." "You're fortunate to have him," George said. "Not many people would put up with you. The only thing he's good for is wheeling me around and blocking angry people who want to hurt me after I foreclose on their homes." Mr. Potter put the newspaper down. "Now, why do you keep bothering me?" "I heard you were in the hospital and wanted to check in on you. What did the doctor say?" "It was a mild heart attack." "You're going to live, right?" "We're all dying, George. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." "What do you mean you have work to do? It's Christmas Eve, Mr. Potter, and besides, it's not like you have other guests." Mr. Potter threw down the newspaper. "What are you, my guardian angel?" Maybe so, maybe so. "Well, I don't need guardian angels, and I sure enough don't need friends. Doesn't it bother you that you have no friends?" Do you really want to be my friend, George? Yes. Well, I'd like you to know, Potter growled, that as your friend, I'd like nothing more than to wipe that smirk off your face. How can you possibly be happy in that business of nickels and dimes? George looked out the window. The stars sparkled in the clear night sky. He wondered which one the Magi might have followed centuries ago to find the infant child in Bethlehem. I like my job. A few years ago, I offered you the opportunity of a lifetime and you turned me down. You still think you made the right choice? I know I did. Hogwash, Mr. Potter said. You'll leave your kids nothing. They'll have nice memories of their family together. That won't put food on the table after you're gone, and if you still have that piddly life insurance policy, that won't take care of them for long either. What you're saying may be true, but that doesn't mean you're right. Why must you speak in riddles, Mr. Potter said. Of course I'm right. Besides, I know why you've been trying to be my friend. George turned from the window. Oh, why's that? You want to run against Wainwright for mayor and need my help. Now don't go getting ideas, Mr. Potter. I'm not running for anything but executor of Bailey Building and Loan. Hogwash. I actually believed you for a moment. No one has ever wanted to be my friend. I'm not running for mayor, George repeated, and I do want to be your friend. You think I'd leave my family on Christmas Eve to come visit someone I didn't care about? Potter paused for a moment. Are you sure you want to be my friend, George? Sure, I'm sure. George was shocked when he saw Mr. Potter smile. He didn't think the man's lips were capable of turning that far upward, but they did. Well, my friend, what if I told you that mix-up at the bank a few years ago that almost put you out of business could have been avoided? George turned his good ear to Mr. Potter. How's that? I found your $8,000, George, and I never told you. George waited for the punchline to the cruel joke, but it never came. Are you making a joke? I'm serious, friend. George suddenly felt like he was going to be sick. After a few deep breaths, he looked up to see Mr. Potter still smiling. Do you know how tortured I was from that, Mr. Potter? You acted as if you had no idea where the money was and even called the police on me. I know, Mr. Potter chuckled. Still want to be my friend, George? Did you know what that did to me, to my family? Still want to be my friend, George? How could you be so cruel? It's a cruel world, George. Still want to be my friend? As George walked towards the door, Potter called after him. This is the real world we live in, friend. Outside the hospital, George was filled with rage. He wanted so much to go back into the room and strike Mr. Potter. Long moments passed and the strength seemed to leave him. It was like he could barely walk now. All the emotions from the first half of that night a few years ago came rushing back to him. Helplessness, anger, frustration. With barely the strength to move, George shuffled over to a bench where he sat down. In the distance, a man dressed in a thick wool coat rang a bell. It was a charitable organization looking for donations. George was reminded of what Clarence had said about bells. Every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. The second part of that night came back to George and seemed to wash away the memories of the first part. From meeting Clarence to the gift of seeing the world without him in it and the second chance to live again. What should I do, Clarence? George said, but no one answered. George looked skywards and finally realized that snow had started to fall. It was beautiful the way it shifted in the wind and drifted down and covered him. What should I do, God? Suddenly a peace came over George. He was reminded that the missing money was long since over. It didn't matter now. Money did not matter. What mattered was how he would respond to Mr. Potter. 15 minutes later, George wandered past Boris back into the hospital room with his head covered in snow. Mr. Potter wasn't looking at spreadsheets, documents, or newspapers this time. He simply stared out the window at the falling snow. What did you decide to do, George? He said without turning from the window. Are you going to call the police? In front of George wasn't a wealthy banker, but a broken old man in a hospital bed. A man with no friends, family, or hope. I decided I'm going to forgive you. Mr. Potter turned from the window. What? Here I am telling you that I took that $8,000. You could sue me, have me arrested, and any number of other legal actions. You've waited your entire life to strike out at me. Here's your chance, George. You're wrong. I never wanted to hurt you. That's how you see the world, not me. You're weak like your father. Someday you'll learn that compassion is a sign of strength, not weakness. Hogwash, Mr. Potter said, but not with the same conviction he usually did. I was once given a great gift, George said, approaching the hospital bed, and a second chance. I'm passing that same grace along to you. With every word George spoke, the peace that had defeated the anger within him was transforming yet again, this time into joy. I forgive you, Mr. Potter. How could you forgive me? Mr. Potter turned away and used the bedsheet to wipe his eyes. I'm a horrific man, George. I've done unspeakable things to people to gain wealth. I've all but secured my eternal destination. It's not too late, George said. I want you to live again, Mr. Potter. George rested his hand on top of Mr. Potter's frail hand. Do you want to live again, Henry? Tears rolled down Mr. Potter's cheeks. I do want to live again. Henry Potter grasped George's hand like an infant holding on to a parent. The old man shut his eyes tight as if that could stop the tears. Forgive me, George. I do. God, forgive me for all that I've done. He does, George said. The entire Bailey family celebrated Christmas of 1948 in the hospital with Mr. Potter and Boris. 1949 started off on a good note in Bedford Falls. Henry Potter gave all the money back to George along with interest. George spent the next week trying to hand out portions of the money out to those who helped him on that Christmas Eve when he was in trouble. There was Annie, the Martinis, Bert, Ernie, and so many others in Bedford Falls. He never told them the truth of what happened, only that he inherited some money and wanted to pay everyone back. Ironically, everyone refused the money and George ended up donating it to the 2 churches in town. In the coming weeks and months, George partnered with his new friend to set up a company dedicated to helping those in need. Henry moved into a modest home in Bailey Park, and the Potter Mansion had new life breathed into it as an orphanage. Mr. Potter's new focus and work seemed to improve his health as well as his energy and enthusiasm. The cruel reputation that had formed from his decades of ruthless business dealings all but disappeared. Henry Potter's name soon became synonymous with words like kindness, generosity, and love. However, a few years later, the reprieve Henry received with his health did expire. In the fall of 1951, George spoke at his friend's funeral. Both the church and the cemetery were overcrowded with citizens of Bedford Falls, as well as politicians and celebrities who all but praised this man who once had no friends. The end. Well, if you made it this far in the story, you've hopefully enjoyed my small piece of fan fiction for the film It's a Wonderful Life by Frank Capra. I'm a huge fan of this film, and I've used it when I taught screenwriting in college. And I found that this film is so very layered, and I wanted to just explore some of the secondary characters and flush them out a little and maybe give them some backstories. I had a lot of fun researching that period of time of 1948, the types of cars they drove, what was playing in the movie theaters, the news, and it was a lot of fun to do this. Let me know your thoughts. I have some ideas about maybe doing another story, maybe with Violet or George facing the mayor. But let me know your thoughts. Again, I don't own the rights to this. This is just a piece of fan fiction. I don't financially benefit from this, but it's just a love letter to the people that made this movie. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. For those of you interested in supporting the channel, please check out my novels at johntheo.com or where all books are sold online. Thank you.